Hello friends, it's MerMay, so I'm going to show you how I made my deep sea mermaid, Mariana of the Hadel. Except that's totally not happening in this video. Why? Because I tore her apart like a year ago, just because. Her body still bends, and half of her fins are still there. Her arms are articulated, and the mono magic stuff is still there. The body is apple white, and her head is a shrunken Frankie Stein. At some point, I bored holes so that I could add wires for modifications, and she has no ears. It still moves. Oh. Well, alright. Her hands have holes in them for her old fins, but the wrists are fine, albeit with chipped paint. I used different wires on the fins than the body. I made her in 2017, and flip sequins was the new hotness. I wanted to use the popularity for attention. Shocking. But the way they lay was more appealing to me because they overlap like fish scales. They're in fine shape, but the stitching job was awful and they look bad. Let's wreck her. I'm testing how the acetone works, and if you're convinced that only professional level art mediums are durable, stop. Because this color is literally all sidewalk chalk. The sealant may have been brushed on Liquitex, but I'm not sure. The stuff on her back here is Crayola Mono Magic and is still pretty well attached to her body. I even added sand to it, and it's rough to dry to get off. Epoxy clay dries harder, but don't feel like it's the only option that there is for sculpting on customs. All of the customs that I made in 17 used Crayola Mono Magic as a sculpting, and it's held up astoundingly. I'm going to remove the flip sequence to replace it. Back then, flip sequence was new to where you couldn't find the plain fabric at art stores, so I used a pencil case for this. I don't remember how I attached it to her, but it's really darn stuck on there. The fins definitely have hot glue on them, and I think that it may have even been from the dollar store. It sounds stupid, but I recently learned that it's the quality of the glue that matters and not both the glue and the gun that makes it strong. I don't know. So here we are with all the garbage that I got off of her. I removed the bulk of her scales and fins so that I can redo them, and some of the body that was near the doll base so she can bend better there, like the rest of the body here. I was planning even here to make her look more fish than mermaid, so I wasn't too sure what I was going to do with her head and arms, but YOLO. I'm gonna get right in with the eyes in her head for the sculpting. I wanted her to have huge jaws, that was the bulk of the head. The thing is that I don't want to have to anchor them with glue or anything, so I bent the ends of the wires that go in the head in a few different directions so that it doesn't just slip out. I have some holes next to the doll's mouth, so I'll put something there too. I don't know what it will be yet. For the lure, I wanted to have it be jointed, so I thought to bend the wire tightly through an elastic band to connect that to the neck. This is actually a huge waste of time. And this too, trying to wrap a wire around her neck and body so that it would have been nice and anchored. This turned out to be bulky and I wasn't sure that it would work. So I bored a hole through her neck to thread the wire in the plastic. At the same time, I was worried that the articulation would be stifled, so I took the time to try and bend a sort of ring out of this wire. It would allow it to swing like a hinge and also pivot. That would essentially let it move like a ball and socket, even if it's not super smoothly. That being said, there's still an end to it, which is where the head should go. I tied it up and it became really long, and I tested to see if that would work with the head, and it does, I guess. I'll cut down the area around the other joints. Doing this on the shoulders helped the most, but surprisingly, it didn't matter on the rest. The body has lots of leftover glue on it, so I'll cut that off. I use yarn as most of the bulk on our body. It's cheap and regularly available if you can't find the quilt batting that regular art dolls use, which this doll has too, and can let you bulk up specific areas in better detail. When that's done, I'll add more wire to the end of the body for a longer tail. I have these thin sheets of baked Sculpey UltraLight, which is actually pretty flexible, so I'm going to use that for the tail fin. I carved it down a bit where the wire will go, and trimmed down the edges so it looks more like a fin. Her arms are kind of long for a fishy or beast, so I thought to give her crustacean claws. I'll use aluminum foil to bulk up anywhere that will get sculpting. The wires between the jaw armature are going to be a pharyngeal inner jaw, like a moray eel, or xenomorph like you were thinking. For the sculpting on the body and head, I'm using Paperclay Delight. I'm making the doll body thicker so that it looks better on the fish body. Most of the torso stays kind of the same here as the end, but the head definitely will need more sculpting, so this is just a primary bulking with clay. It puts in the basic shapes and helps anchor down those armature wires. I have different plans for the bottom jaw. I didn't want for the claws to look too weird, but they're claws on a deep sea fish. Comparing the jaws shows that it needs to be bigger, so I made the bottom jaw longer with a separate piece of wire. It kind of messes with my plan for it, but I'll manage. The rest of the head is a little big, but that's alright, I guess. This is why I don't plan my customs on paper. That helps for when the doll's arm falls off. See? Her arm fell off. The joint was still in the doll's body. I tried to use the same method to make a joint as I did for the neck. I had to wrap some of the wire around the arms, so that solidified the decision to make her arms chunkier. But that means her claws can be too. I get really picky about details, so I split the tail fin and put it on a clay tube over the wire. I also made lots of teeth out of Sculpey UltraLight because they're definitely going to be long and thin, and clay that cures very rigid is going to snap before it's on her. This clay is forgiving. Back to Paperclay Delight on her arms. I made one side a little thinner to maybe suggest that they're not out of place. And kind of a back fin. I'm refining her head, adding some quote-unquote lips to define where the teeth will go. The pharyngeal jaw lips are going to emulate how a goblin shark's mouth looks. I want these things to be fins with barbels. Now I'll sculpt some fins. These ones will look like crustacean fins, and the dorsal and pectoral fins will emulate the look of oarfish fins. I also have to refine the tail fin. Also, I'll try to make some beads for the ball joint. I made some teeny tiny eyes for her, and have to figure out how they'll go on her head. I'm not worried about what it looks like, just how it's shaped because of what I have planned. I add nostrils and blend the fins. I'm starting on this incredibly delicate detail, which is the teeth in the pharyngeal jaw. They're going to be like the teeth that full sharks have, so they look like perpendicular rows from a distance. It's a good enough compromise, even for me, because I know that none of the material that I have, and none of my body parts, will cooperate to make the individual teeth that I would have preferred, so I'll just paint them on. I'm fine with how they turn out, it's fine. For some reason I decided to put in gum detail on the primary oral jaws, and this is just useless. It would have been better if I made the teeth indentations of the gums with her teeth that she winds up with. Off camera I tested the fabric that her body will get, and the yarn strings are too prominent. To remedy this, I'll add a buffer of some scrap fleece that I have. I stitch it on her hip so it doesn't slip down. I'm not worried about how the stitches look here since it will be covered. In retrospect, I should have used black fleece so the color doesn't come through the outer final fabric. I get her tail fin on. I don't want it to slip off of the wire, so I'm going to put in a few stitches between the end of the tail and the fin. It's clay, so don't expect it to be sturdy and last, but it will work until I can get it completely attached. These fins were already big enough, but I put in these bits of an old folder to be like the swimmer pleopods that crustaceans have. So they turned out looking bad. I glued them in and smoothed the bump with paper clay. On the other fins, I'm going to paint them black. They're all kind of thin, so I'm painting on top of paper to not get that paint on my table. These fins are going to have some photophores at the end, which are going to glow in the dark. I'm also going to paint a couple on the primary fins. I was careful to be sparse with the bioluminescent spots on all of her. I used fabric paint because the dimension would help the spots actually be seen. I paint a very subtle gradient on the pleopods because I was worried that the paint would chip off of the plastic. It didn't really chip off actually, so I'm a little disappointed that I didn't bother too much with the very ends. There's some little sculpting blemishes on them, so I decided to paint them to be old scars. I thought it would be easier than patching them. I painted the middle of her pharyngeal jaw with an aqua color to at least suggest something like a wolf trap angler. I also wanted to give it a little bit of a hue like a sarcastic French head, but it got kind of buried. I'm not too concerned with keeping the paint precise. The oral jaws are going to be regular fleshy colors. The bottom jaw is going to get a lot of shading because it's going to be a lot bigger and deeper at the end. I tried to paint in the ridges on the inside of the mouth because I didn't sculpt that. They're too stark, but an effort was put in. I go back and forth with that and the shading that the jaws should have regularly. The bottom jaw is never going to blend into the body how I want because of the armature, but I'll try anyway. The exterior of the pharyngeal jaw will be black to match the rest. I like the way the finish came out, but I don't know if it'll match at the end. This is coated in super clear. Oh lord. This is the worst. So anyway, I sealed it with Mr. Super Clear to try for a matte finish on the inside of the mouth, so that I can try to add dimensional highlights with glossier sealants. I don't know how well this works even in person. The aqua color on her mouth is going to glow, so I lay on thick layers of paint. I thought the claws were boring, so I decided to carve some detail to make them look a little more like claws. I carved a kind of serrated edge to them. The armature wire was kind of in the way on the one claw, but I managed. I paint them black because I guess I thought I was done with them. Here I'm roughly measuring the amount that I had to cut out of this clear PVC vinyl for her fin. I cut only a bit out and trim it down as I go. Before that, I should probably get her skin on. It's old polyurethane leggings that I had that I tried to fit tight onto her. I cover her tail fin with it and make sure that the exact amount of fabric is here before I sew it up with something that's apparently not an invisible stitch. Because I'm stupid, I painted the individual teeth on these ridges. Frilled sharks have rows of teeth that each have 3 tips, but Mariana here has rows of blob teeth because I'm incapable of doing detail like that. I'm telling you, if I knew how not to kill myself over details, my projects would get done a lot faster with a lot less pain I have to endure. For example, I tried to give the teeth dimension in the paint color, but it is far too subtle. Here I'm trying to make her bobbler. I'm making like a tube that I can put over the armature wire the same way that I did for the tail fin. But conditioned ultralight is incredibly hard to work with. I tried to add barbels, but they don't want to cooperate. I'm adding photophores to the pleopods. They don't have to glow too much though. I made the bobble from hot glue because I don't know how else to make it. Finally, I can try to put the head on the body. Shockingly, the BJD joint didn't work. If there's one thing that I do well, it's put in several hours of pain and effort for some detail that either doesn't matter or doesn't turn out how I want. I really don't think I'll ever learn. I connected the neck wire to the bobble wire instead. I filled the areas around the other joints with scraps so the skin doesn't collapse on itself. I'm trying to use the excess of it to make a big throat for her like a pelican eel. The thing is that I wanted for the entirety of her covered in one piece of this fabric, but this excess from her body can only cover either her head or her jaw. It didn't help that I tried to make it work and failed. Anyway, I tried to make the throat look convincing, so I stuffed it with paper before I glued the fabric to the jaw. I think I messed up the entire head the first time I tried this. For the skull, I had to poke holes in the fabric for her bobble and fins. I wasn't concerned with her eyes or nostrils because they're small enough to just cut out. I don't want the raw edge of the fabric to show, so I glued it down to try to be like a lip for her. I kinda had to bend her jaw back, so I had to fix that. I don't know what happened, but I think I'm trying to put the wire for the bobble back into the head from where it connects to the wire of her neck. This part can actually be seen from her open mouth, so I need to cover it up. I'll fix her jaw while I'm at it, I guess. I thought the claws were boring, so I stabbed in some wire scraps for an armature before I go in with some more Paperclay Delight to make some bigger serrations on them. To think I wanted these claws to be smaller details of hers. They already have the fabric on them, but the serrations never had it, and they're going to be painted black anyway. Now for the nerve-wracking part, putting on the fin. I knew going in that this was going to be weird, but I tried my best to get it fully centered. The ventral belly side has a kind of guide, because that's why I sewed up the leggings carefully down the middle, so it's pretty accurate. I'm trimming the vinyl down as I go so that I don't have to replace the whole thing. The dorsal backside is a little trickier, so I use some thread to get a straight line, and I'll just trace it with a watercolor pencil for a guide. Now I can refine the shape of the fin a bit, but it can be messy. I need to make a bit of a guide for where the frilled fins are going to go on the vinyl. I trace and cut it to shape and try my best to jam the wires of the fins into the dense mermaid body. These things are super tricky to put on because they're kind of delicate. I lost my good pliers and I'm using ones that hurt my already dead hands. No, the spinal surgery didn't get rid of my hand pain. I had to figure out how to put these pleopods on. The fin is a little higher on the body than I thought it'd be, so I put them on the doll's body. I started painting the claws and realized that I can never clean vinyl, so I mask it off completely. I cut it out along the hot glue residue so I can paint that block. Now I can go in and touch up the mouth and do some other painting without worrying about getting it on the vinyl. I have to mix the colors again so that the touch-ups match. I'm also not too worried about keeping the color in the jaws. I also cleaned up the pharyngeal jaw and also the cover up in the throat. I'll also open up the legging material here where her eyes are, so I can clean those up as well. I know that the glow paint needs some help, so I'm making some white dots where I want the photo force to go. I do my best to keep both sides looking similar. I refine those in black. Earlier I painted her completely with watered down black paint, so now I'm brushing on a watered down Duraclear all over to try and get a consistent finish on her. And her bobble. I used hot glue to put in her teeth because I didn't think other glues would be good at this point. But it was taking a very long time, so I did it off camera. Now that they're all in, I drip super glue between them and on the gums to try and keep them all on her face. The bobble definitely won't move at the end, so I'll cover up the gap with Delight. And one of these barbs fell off, so I fixed them both up. I paint it black when it's dry. I used the old mask to protect her face before I put some soft pastel color on her teeth. I'll finish them with clear nail polish. Maybe I'll make them stronger? The last thing to do is open up her nostrils. I seal them off so the fabric doesn't unfurl. And with that, it's done. Okay, she's done. So what is there to do now? That's it, the end.